You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and joined as always by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen, how we doing?
Doing good. Welcome to the first official podcast of the 2024 season.
Let's go.
The NFL season, yeah. I was like, bro, it's February.
Yeah, Super Bowl was, a week and a half ago. So, no, man, I'm doing good. So, obviously, glad to be here with you guys. I'm excited about the content here tonight, right? I think Derek had a really good plan that he laid out for us. So, hoping everybody's able to take something from that and obviously, digest and apply how best you can and kind of what works with your strategy as you're going through some things. But I'm not going to spoil too much. I know Derek worked really hard on it, so I'm going to hold back from regurgitating. However, I am going to take a minute to offer my prayers and condolences to the city of Kansas City and the people and families affected by the events that happened during the championship parade that they had for the Kansas City Chiefs. So, a tragic event that no one ever wants to see happen. And not that it makes it any better or worse, but at a celebratory function like these that the city puts on for the team to celebrate them, for the fan base to come out and celebrate the team that they root for year in and year out, week in and week out. So tragic events, but really my condolences, thoughts and prayers for the families and loved ones of the victims and the people who are going through that difficult time. But shout out to not only the first responders, but the people in the crowd who are really the unsung heroes and stepped up and did a really courageous thing to help, apprehend said assailants until law enforcement could get to them. So hats off to you guys as well.
That's well said, Kevin. And I'll add to it. You called it tragic. I'll call it senseless. And it's just such a damn shame that a party was cut short like that. And I know that it happened, kind of after everything was done, but it's just a shame that is where we're at, that some senseless idiots can ruin a good time. It's not new, right? It's been like this for a while. Unfortunately, it's probably going to happen again. But it doesn't change the fact that it is senseless, and you try to make sense of it and you just can't. I hope that everybody who has been affected by it or impacted by it is able to heal at some speed, at some sense of time and whatever it is that they can do. But it's not just the DJ, the radio DJ that lost her life. It's all the people that have trauma from that now. It's gonna be hard for them to go to big events, right? Like without thinking about that stuff. It impacts a lot of people. It impacts people who weren't even there. That maybe will think twice about going to the next big celebration, whatever that is, because you got to be mindful of that. So that's well said, and a good point to bring up that it's just tragic and senseless. I'll switch gears now, unless Derek, you want to add something to that.
No, I was going to shift gears myself. So go ahead.
I'll switch gears now. What you guys do with your non-NFL Sunday? I watched a hockey game. It is hockey season now.
I shoveled more snow on Saturday.
That'll happen. It's hockey season for me. I know you guys aren't too much into it, but we just had the Great American Race, right? Daytona 500 just rolled off there a day later than it was supposed to.
And hold on a second. I'd love to be into hockey season. I would love to.
Oh yeah.
Comcast refuses to televise
Oh,
our local team, and
I feel so
so
bad for you guys about
it
that.
makes it really challenging to. And I guess it's not overly challenging. Yes, I mean I could get ways around that, but just the easy way to be able to turn on my TV and enjoy that. And so instead of enjoying a hockey game on my newer, nice television that I very much enjoy, I can watch it on my phone.
Yeah.
And sit there and watch it on my phone and try and, and I like hockey, but I'm not going to say I'm an expert, right? I'm still learning as I'm viewing and listening to the announcers and their takes and trying to see what they see. And it's hard to follow on my phone for me just because I'm not as fluid with the sport. So boo you, Comcast, and cuss words to you and your management for making this decision.
Cosign, and full disclosure, I might be watching a hockey game on my phone as we record this here podcast.
Just the slightest.
It's a big one. But anyways, hockey season in full force. I just said, NASCAR rolled off with an exciting finish there, right? We've been treated to exciting finishes to the Super Bowl of the NFL and the Super Bowl of NASCAR. Now F1 is about to get underway. And I know you guys have varying levels of interest in that, but it is nice. It's not a bad weekend filler. It's a nice way to spend an early Sunday morning if you happen to be woken up by a child or a dog. It's nice.
I'd rather watch a golf course dry.
You could do that too. The options are out there. As so long as Comcast doesn't block you from watching your golf course drying channel.
Although the one thing that you didn't mention that I was a little sad about is March is right around the corner.
Yeah, I'll say it. Okay, so I was going to get to that.
Okay,
yes, March is right around the corner. So start paying attention to your teams now, right? Start figuring out. I'll throw you out a freebie. Look up what KenPom means. That's going to help you out as you get to Selection Sunday and bracket filling Monday. Okay, so look up KenPom. Figure that out. That's just my freebie that I'm going to throw out there for everybody.
So, but you talk about good weekend fillers, starting to catch up and watch some of these college basketball teams, hoop it out there, and you've got a lot of really good matchups, kind of, constantly taking place there, as well as some, good matchups, even amongst the not highly touted teams, the Blue Buds, all of that. So we're tuning into.
I'll tell you what, the Big 12 is a mess in the best way possible. It is chaos because I think they're projecting 10 of those teams to make it into the field. I've seen anywhere from 10 to 11, maybe even 12 of their teams making it into the field of 64, which is bonkers. But yeah, the Big 12 is a mess. The SEC is a mess. It's going to be a fun March, I think.
Right. Well,
into April.
If you're in the Big 12, it is hard to win on the road.
Yeah.
Really hard to go into somebody else's house and win. Doesn't matter. We've seen a ton of the, unranked guys knock off top 10 teams just because they had the home court advantage type of thing in that conference. So, and top to bottom, very solid, very strong conference. Anyway, that's my plug that I'll put in there for college basketball. So
I'll throw another thing out there. College baseball just started too, and there's been some bananas results already in that. So I think number one was Wake Forest, and they just lost to North Carolina Greenville. The big bad baseball team that North Carolina Greenville puts out there.
Did you see the gal on the Arkansas softball team hit for the home run
for the cycle? Yes. How insane is that?
That was cool.
You only do that in Griffey. That's the only time you are able to do that. The fact that she did that in real life is so cool.
And she went oppo.
Yeah.
For her last home run.
Two or last three.
Yeah, the first. Yeah, because she's a lefty, right? So the first two went right center. The third one went pretty well center field, and the third one she went oppo to left field. Good for her, man. That was cool.
As cool as that is for her to hit 4 home runs in a game, it's also that's a team thing, right? Because you can't hit for the home run cycle unless you got people getting on board in front of you, right? So That's a very big accomplishment. As much as it is for her, it's for her teammates too.
They need to quit throwing her rise balls. Everything she hit was high.
Stop
Everything
throwing it
she
to
hit
her
was
at
high.
all.
Well, I mean,
Barry
get
Bonds,
low,
put her on with the
Like-
bases full.
right? Drop ball, curve, something. But everything they threw her was a rise ball. It was all chest high, and she just doink. I was
That's
like,
weird.
holy smokes! The exact same pitch at 4 at bats. Like she was locked in.
That was good. That was really cool.
There you go. Y'all never thought we'd be dropping softball references here on
College
this
softball.
podcast, but we do loosely tune into the highlights of everything. Also, speaking of, shout out to Caitlin Clark and
Yeah.
the scoring title that she achieved there at the Iowa Hawkeyes. So shout out to her. Crazy, crazy statistics, but I mean, she just is. She's an elite scorer. Regardless of sport, she is able to put points on the board, unlike anything else that we've seen. Now, an argument can be said that there's no real talent around her, so of course she's going to be able to put up 30 shots a game, but she has to make those shots to score. So kudos to Caitlin Clark and the new scoring champion.
There you go. All righty. Well, any other thoughts here before we start diving into back into the fantasy football world?
Enough with the sides. Let's get into the meat and potatoes here.
All right, let's go ahead and do it. So we're going to start with the kind of the beginner's guide to fantasy football here. And so, a lot of times we do get a lot of questions through some of the socials about, what does it mean when we're talking about scoring types and league types, and what does it mean when we're talking about some of the positional advantage or positional values, or even more so when we're even talking some of the basic stuff such as hey, he's a QB1 or he's a wide receiver 2, or whatever that those types of things are, as well as some tips and tricks as far as things go, and even when it comes to trading value, understanding the rules, all that kind of good stuff. So kind of let's go ahead and kind of start it off here, I guess, with probably some of like the definition side of things here, and really kind of dive into some of the different scoring types that are out there, and we'll kind of just go through the most common ones out there. And I figure, with them 3 most common types, we'll each kind of take one and rock and roll from there. So who wants to start us off here?
All right, I'll start us off. Fair enough. So your first type, which is how fantasy football really got started, right, is considered standard scoring. So standard scoring is you get 1 point for every 20 yards, 1 point for every 10 yards rushing or receiving, and you get 1 point for every 20 yards passing. Typically, there are not big yards associated with standard scoring, so your average game score is generally in the 75 to 90 point range, is typically where that is. Quarterback scoring varies between 4 points per touchdown and 6 points per touchdown. It started as 4. So the true standard scoring is 4 points for a passing touchdown, 6 points for a rushing or receiving touchdown. But this is it's quickly becoming outdated. There are still some leagues that do standard scoring, but this is very much, I don't want to say archaic, but it is definitely our grandfather's style of fantasy football. It's how it got its start, and it's a good basic entry level, right, to understand, to kind of get your feet wet, to see if you even enjoy it or not. Because typically, as you move on to these other scoring types, the level of competition and the level of intensity within your group typically goes up with it.
I like it.
Yeah, I think that's it's the base model, and it's the model that basically everything else is based around, right? So that's you start there, and then you can kind of manipulate points in other areas to kind of change how your scoring goes. The most common one of that, and I'll get into the next one here, is called PPR, point per reception scoring, and that basically takes your standard scoring, but then it adds value to receptions. And that is really it changes the value of certain players because you're gonna put more emphasis on a receiver who's gonna catch 6 or 8 passes a game versus a receiver who's going to catch one for 50 yards. Your big over the top guy, your standard over the top defensive guy, one catch for 40 yards and maybe a touchdown. This point per reception will makes those guys who get more volume more valuable. So you're also looking at not just receivers, but that applies to running backs too. So think of a guy like give me
Eckler until this year. Eckler,
yes, Austin Eckler, who caught a ton of passes right from there in Los Angeles. He was a big PPR monster because if you get bonus points for receptions, he was getting the running back work, but he was also getting the receiving work out of the backfield, and so that's what made him so valuable. Now, if you're playing in a standard league, then he's valuable in that he is a running back, but not as valuable because he's not getting the points for catching passes. A few other things that I'd like to point out with this is if you're in a PPR league, you want to target high volume pass catchers, like I've been saying. You want to pay attention to the depth chart for like running backs, especially, if they do, which is becoming more common in the NFL, is a running back by committee. Is there a guy who typically comes in on a third down play, which is traditionally a passing down? If there's a third down back, that guy still has value, even if he's only playing on third downs and he's the check down back. That guy's got value. So it may not be what you hope it is when you draft him, but that's the basic of the point per reception, is that it will gives a little bit bonus to dudes that are catching passes, be it receivers, running backs, or tight ends. Travis Kelce, again, PPR monster, right? Because of all the volume that he would get from Patrick Mahomes. Did I call him Patrick Kelce? Or I call him Travis Kelce, right?
So James White, right, the old New England running back, made a career both in the NFL and in fantasy as being a third down back because Tom Brady trusted him so much that he got a lot of third down screen work. Most games there are absolute exceptions, but most games carried the ball 5 to 7 times, maybe. But with that, he'd see 5 or 6 receptions, and that's how he ended up with this point total. He was constantly a good flex play if you needed that, because you could bank on 10 points out of James White because of his receiving work.
Yeah, and it's reception. Those point per reception is on top of, right, what you would get for your yardage for your normal catch, right? Like that's where it is. It's points on top of.
Right, absolutely. And there's a middle ground out there too, right? As far as what's called half point PPR scoring, which, as the name kind of indicates there, it's the same type of scoring format as standard, but instead of a full point for a full point per reception, it's a half point that's given per reception there as well. And each format certainly kind of lends itself to some different styles of play, and certainly changes the value for guys in there as well, right? The half point, you're looking for guys that can either break it open for a big play or are getting volume, and it kind of levels the playing field a little bit out there between pass catchers out there, certainly, and it doesn't necessarily overload one particular style of play there, but you kind of an interesting thing there when you kind of step back and you look at how each scoring type really can magnify that just off of the running back position, for instance, right? Like you think back to a couple years ago, Derrick Henry, monster in a standard scoring format, would still score well even in PPR formats because the volume was there on the ground. But like Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler would absolutely, blow everybody out the water in a full point per reception type of deal there. But just the little bit of scoring, a little bit of difference there in the scoring can absolutely sway the difference between a positional 1 type of finish on the season or like a positional 6-7 type of deal there. And there's a lot of range that can happen based off the scoring format there as well. So any other thoughts here on some scoring types, maybe some custom scoring type of formats to maybe be aware of, or that you're seeing more popular out there?
More competitive leagues go to like a tight end bonus, right? So you have either, and really it's in any format, your standard, your half point, or your full points per reception. And then on top of that, your tight end position group specifically will receive a bonus set amount of points, whether it's a half point bonus or a full point bonus. And that is to kind of help level the playing field on tight ends a little bit. Because generally after your top, 1, 2, maybe 3 tight ends, there's pretty substantial drop off just to have these scores set the way they are. So it is something that's starting to become more common. So it's definitely something that you need to pay attention to your rules, right, of the league, and you understand the rules before you go into your draft. But many new leagues are incorporating some sort of tight end bonus specifically to help even out their value. Because if you didn't have, up until this past season, right, Kelsey had a bit of a down year compared to his standards as he's getting a bit older, but the Travis Kelce's, the Rob Gronkowski's, going back to Tony Gonzalez and
Julius
even
Thomas,
Antonio Gates, right?
Like you hit some Hall of Fame somehow,
right? You get some of these big receiving tight ends outside of that class, right? And you get back into your Dalton Schultz, your Jason Wittens, your David Njoku's, your Dallas Clarks, right? The old Peyton Manning tight end. It helps value up those guys to, mid-level wide receivers to close that gap, right?
Yeah. Right. Just kind of an add-on there as well. One of the things that players can be looking for as well there is that to be called a tight end premium type of league there as well. So heard it referred to both ways. So if you're in a league where they're talking about a tight end premium, there you go. It's the same thing that Kevin just described there.
Yeah. So. And you hear us talk about the crazy scoring that we have, and it's scoring that has been tinkered with and adjusted and voted on over the course of the last 15, 16 years. We've been tinkering with our scoring, and it's not an exact science. We like to score points. So in our league, if you score 250 points, you should be asking yourself, where did I go wrong? Did I not start somebody? Whereas in a standard format, if you score 250 points, buy yourself a lottery ticket.
Roster scored 4 touchdowns. Yeah. Everybody in your lineup scored 4 touchdowns.
Your
buy yourself a lottery ticket because you are the luckiest person alive, and why not try to let that luck continue on?
Right.
So that is, kind of the fun thing about, the league that you're in. And I will say that it doesn't matter if, you're in a standard or you're in a full PPR or half point PPR. It's important to know what the rules are before you go into your draft. Like, I can't stress that enough. Know the rules of your league before you go into a draft, because if you're drafting for one set of rules and all of a sudden it's a tight end premium, you're probably going to spend a little bit more capital on some tight ends because you don't want to let that get away from you. If it's a standard scoring, we're taking quarterback last. If it's a super flex, we're taking quarterback pretty early.
So that brings up a good point to the scoring systems, the super flex, because we hadn't touched on that yet. And it kind of transitions us into the different types of leagues as well, right? Because typically people refer to it as a super flex league. So with that, if you hear super flex, it gives you the ability to have 2 starting quarterbacks in your lineup.
Right. Your lineup consists of a quarterback. Typical lineup, right, is going to be a quarterback, 2 running back positions, right, 2 wide receiver positions, a tight end, and then a defense and special teams. And a kicker.
And a flex.
And a flex. And that flex is typically a wide receiver, tight end, or running back. That's what's in your flex position. It's usually one of those 3 positions. So you can start at most 3 running backs with your 2 running backs that you have and a running back in the flex, or 3 wide receivers or 2 tight ends. So that's kind of your standard roster construct for what you're starting week in and week out. And then you can add other positions to it, like Kevin was saying, with the super flex. And the super flex, you want to have a quarterback because typically quarterbacks score the most points. They're the only ones that touch the ball every play aside from the center, and the center's not getting you anything on fantasy.
No,
very
absolutely.
true.
So that's also becoming pretty popular, right? I don't want to say mainstream yet, but I do think it's creeping up to the at least a 50-50 split, right? Between, okay, it's a standard league, or okay, it's a super flex. So definitely a type of league to be looking out for.
Right. So let's go ahead and fully dive into the types of leagues out there, right? There's several types of leagues, right? And we kind of touched on a little bit on the super flex side of things, but other types of leagues really have kind of long carrying impact on how to look at the draft, how to look at how to manage a team, things like that. And so there are things out there, such as redraft, such as dynasty, customized type of leagues. And let's go ahead and we'll just kind of touch on each one of those things and things to be looking at there, things to be considerate of as you're kind of mapping out your foray here into the fantasy football world. And Kevin, why don't you go ahead and lead us off with this?
Okay. So your redraft league is, again, it's going to be a league where you redraft your entire roster every single season. There is nothing that carries over, maybe aside from the scoring, from one year to the next, whether it's with the same group of people or a new group of people, right? So if typically in redraft leagues in general, you have a little bit more of an opportunity to find a good diamond in the rough, or a good player later in the draft who is, possibly a rookie, or possibly you think is ready to have kind of a breakout season. It gets harder in other types of leagues. But redraft leagues are fun, right? Because if you have a bad season one year, you get to completely wipe the slate. Like, you get to completely erase the board and then start from scratch. There is nothing that carries over and looming over your head from the previous season to the current season, unless you're playing with a bunch of buddies who just like to give you grief. And that's always fun for its own reasons. But definitely, it is the best type of league for new fantasy players. Again, it allows you to get an understanding of how the draft works, what the roster construction looks like, how to set your lineups, how to look for the undrafted players on the waiver wire, and how to go through that, because with it being a learning year, there's going to be plenty of mistakes made, right? We've all made plenty of mistakes and continue to do so, right? This is not a perfect system for anybody. And if they swear to you it is, they're lying. I promise you. I've yet to see a perfect fantasy season where they drafted the perfect team and started the perfect lineup every single week, and they won every single game by having the exact amount of possible points their team could score in every single week, right? That just, it doesn't happen. It's an imperfect system. So it allows for those mistakes. It allows for the learning curves. And again, it's for some players, that's the only way they like to play, right? They don't want carryover from one year to the next, no matter what. And so every year they wipe the slate clean and they say, let's go get them, boys. And they're going to start over from scratch.
Right. And redraft is certainly one of my favorite ways to play. Definitely one of the most popular ones out there. One of my favorite formats to play in. Another format that's out there that's a lot of fun is what's called a dynasty fantasy football team, and a league that is a dynasty roster. You're going to have each player. It's kind of like running the actual franchise for that, where if you're going to draft a player, you have the player all the way through the entirety of their career, unless you drop them or you trade them, and they're on your team from the time you draft them or you pick them up until you ultimately send them to somebody else's roster. You send them to the waiver wire. So dynasty, there's a much different impact. It's a much different lens that it's viewed through, right? When you're talking a redraft type of deal, you're looking for the players for that season, like Kevin summarized very, very succinctly there. Versus with dynasty, you're looking in three, it depends on who you talk to, but sometimes it's either a 2, 3, or 4 year window, right? The average tends to be that 3 year window that you're looking at. So you're looking to get guys to go out there for the next 3 years and really capitalize and be rocking and rolling through that one to put the best roster out there and the best chance to win. And so, that's one of those things that if you're going into a dynasty draft, you might see rookies and younger guys going ahead of big name players that are, approaching the ends of their careers. You'll see guys in their second, third year going over, big name fantasy guys like Cooper Kupp in a dynasty startup, just because, right? How many years are left in the tank and the perceived, run that you have with that player versus, some of these other things. You'll also see wide receivers tend to kind of outshine a lot of these other positions in a dynasty startup, dynasty draft, just simply from the standpoint that they tend to have a little bit longer runway with that. The impact's a little bit more immediate to it, and you have some different wiggle room and some different roster construct by really going out there and focusing on that, because the window is longer than, right? Just like in the NFL anymore, most of these running backs, when when they're drafted, how many of them make it to their first, make it past their first contract? And the answer is not a ton of them. And even when they do, the value isn't necessarily as high from a fantasy perspective as it was in their first, second, or third year. So, that's where you'll tend to see some of that kind of come through there, and a little bit different values be swayed on a dynasty draft.
All right. So the final one is, not final, but a custom league. We talked about, the dynasty, which is as close to, being at the GM of a team that you're going to get, right? Because it's a never ending game that you're playing. Redraft, you're going to get a whole new team, a whole new roster every year. Custom, kind of a mix, right? So there's custom leagues. We have our draft our league, the home league, the Good Old Boys League, is a keeper league, right? So the rules are that we can maintain a player from last year's roster. And it used to be that you could maintain that player from last year's roster and it didn't matter. You just got to keep that person. You could keep them for as long as you wanted. Now we did a platform change and kind of had a hard reset of the league. And now we have a draft penalty associated with our keeper. So our keeper is whatever round we drafted that player in, we lose that pick the next year. So if you keep a first round pick, you lose your first round pick the next year. And that guy serves as your first round pick. Likewise, if you draft a dude in the 15th round and he turns out to be a stud, and you want to keep him, well, then you only lose your 15th round pick. And hopefully that guy is well worth more than a 15 round pick in the next year. A couple of really, really popular custom leagues that there are. And it's one that I'm proud of that we participate in and we have participated in the last couple of years is a guillotine league. A guillotine league, quite simply, is everybody drafts their roster, and after X amount of weeks, teams start getting eliminated from the league. The lowest scoring team for that particular week will get eliminated from the league. So the guillotine will fall. And then those players that were on that team go into the available player pool, and the teams that are still remaining can gobble up and make waiver claims on those teams, or excuse me, on those players. So guillotine leagues are really popular because it's a fun way where you're not really competing against each other or head-to-head matchups. You're just competing against everybody, literally everybody, to not be the lowest score that week to maintain your spot in the league. That's one it's kind of intensive because you need to pay attention to what players are going to be coming available on the market. We do it with a free agency budget. You'll hear us talk about FAB on this show. That's what that is, a free agency budget. And you can put bids on how much you want to spend of that free agency budget. It's standardized money that everybody has the same amount of when the league starts. And so that's how you get those players onto your team, by bidding on them in free agency. Another one, and Derek, you're a big fan of this one, if I'm not mistaken, is the Vampire League.
Mm-hmm.
And the Vampire League is kind of, again, a cruel trick to just one person, because everybody in the league except for one team gets to draft, and that one team will comprise their roster from whatever players are left over after the draft. And then that team is dubbed the Vampire, and they'll play other teams throughout the course of the season. You know, it's just like any other season. They will be matched up head to head. But if you lose to the Vampire team, they get to take one of your players on your roster. So it's a fun way that there's a Twitter account that I like to follow. It's called the Sickos Committee. If you're a fantasy football sicko, you love Vampire Leagues, and you hope that you're the vampire because you would love nothing more than to prove how smart you are with drafting the leftovers and then going in and taking everybody's best player and ultimately becoming the best team. That's a really fun. I'll shut up for now because I've been talking too long about Guillotine and Vampire. I'll ask you guys if there's a fun league, a custom league that you've played in that you really like. And I've got one of those too, that was born out of a lot of free time during the pandemic. Derek, Kevin, do you have
I think there's a couple mainstream ones that people are going to hear a lot. Number one is a best ball league, right? So typically, not always, because I'm in some dynasty ones, but typically a best ball league is set up like a redraft. Okay. The roster clears every season. But what this league does is the roster is auto generated to your best possible scoring lineup. So it takes out some of the heartburn of having to make roster decisions, but it also tests your drafting ability, because in most best ball leagues, there's not trades, there's not free agency. So if your players get injured, there's nothing you can do about it. You're just injured. But they're a lot of fun, and they're great ways to do a lot of drafts, right? We talk about all these drafts that we're in and this, that, and the other. I love drafting best ball teams in preparation for redraft leagues because it gives you a really good idea of what players are going to be in certain areas of a draft, right? What players you feel like you can target, what players you feel like might keep slipping and you feel like you can wait on a little bit longer to create more value once you have said player on your roster. And again, the app, the website, the platform that you're using, whatever that may be, auto generates your best possible lineup. So you don't have to worry about any of that. So that's a very popular thing. A lot of the DFS sites will offer best ball leagues to go along with that. So that's a very popular one. One that is slowly gaining some momentum is 2 tight end leagues. where you have two starting tight end roster spots. And what that does is, again, it puts more value on the tight end position. And if you are typically thinking, okay, I'm gonna wait, I don't want to draft Travis Kelce or Sam Laporta super early. I'm gonna wait because I think I can get a Dalton Schultz or a Dallas Goedert or a Pat Freiermuth later on, right? And I don't have to spend an early draft pick on a tight end. This kind of rearranges that a little bit, because then tight ends essentially become premium, because if you don't have two solid tight ends, you're taking kind of a big hit in one of your starting roster spots. So again, it's not as common, but it is one that's out there. So as you guys are floating through different league constructs, or message boards with teams saying, hey, we have an open spot, come join our league, or however you're looking for these, it's something to be aware of, that these two tight end leagues are slowly gaining some momentum, although they're not what I would call mainstream at the moment.
Right. No, those are some really good call outs. And best ball is another one of my favorite leagues to play in. Certainly allows you to get lots of drafts in and ultimately kind of look up at the end of the season too. And what I tend to use best balls for is not only one, getting preparation for draft, but also kind of take that data that, how it performs over the season long, because I didn't have the ability to alter the roster through trades or through, waiver wire claims, things like that, and see how good the drafting strategy was, and see what worked on that, where I was kind of right, where I was kind of wrong, all of that, and apply that towards future seasons there as well. So best ball, absolutely a fan favorite of mine. As far as some other kind of custom leagues out there that are fun. You touched on the guillotine, you touched on the vampire. Some other ones that are kind of in the similar veins as the vampire is a pirate league. That one's always a lot of fun, where it's kind of along the same line, where you can keep a couple of players safe, but if you lose, your roster is up to being plundered, and you can lose a treasured fantasy prospect there towards the other team. Zombie is kind of in the same vein as the vampire, but to the kind of at that next extent, where you don't necessarily get to draft along with everybody else. You get to pick up the leftovers, and when you win, you get to steal a player, and then all of the rest of those players get kind of dumped back into the player pool, and everybody else gets to go at it. And now the new zombie gets to try and pick up the pieces from there as well. So that's always a fun one that seems to be growing quite a bit there too.
And I'll admit, I joined a league with you guys a couple years back. It was a pirate league. I had no idea what I was doing. And I rage quit about halfway through because I didn't know what was going on. So pay attention to the rules. That's one. But the other league that I was telling you guys about, I was born out of boredom in the pandemic. We called it the Mario Kart League, or anything but the best. And essentially the rules of it were, and you couldn't play with very many people, but the rules of it were, each positional group each week, the high scorer from that week would be ineligible to be part of the available player pool the rest of the league. We did it with 4 players because you can imagine after 18 weeks, you lose 18 quarterbacks. You lose 18 running backs, 18 wide receivers, because whatever the high score is that week, they are no longer eligible to be on your roster. And if you did have an ineligible player on your roster, you got docked like 25 points or whatever it was. So it was a pretty big dock. I called it anything but the best, because you wanted to be the second best at every positional group. That way you weren't having to get rid of that guy. You could just still keep them on your roster. And as long as they were second best, we ended up morphing it into the Mario Kart League, because if you got too far ahead, you get blue shelled back to reality. So that's what that ended up being. It was like a blue shell. If your guy was too good, he'd get blue shelled back to reality, and you would have to find something else to do. But honestly, the cool part about it is like, as long as you and a couple other people agree on a certain set of rules, like you can do anything when it comes to fantasy football, right? Like you make up your own rules as you want. I had never seen anything like this, anything but the best league before. And, buddy of mine just kind of kicked around the idea and worked through it a little bit. And then we were like, all right, let's do it. We got time. It was intensive because you needed to have somebody who had been laid off to pay attention to what was going on fantasy football wise and make sure that ineligible players were kicked off of teams and everything. So that was it was one that I don't think we'll ever do again because nobody's got the free time to do it. But it was a fun league to play in that one year.
All right. Any other thoughts here on types of leagues before we head on into some additional definitions?
No,
All right.
If anybody has other questions, feel free to hit us up, right? At Go Boys FF. Like, we will answer any questions you have. If you come across a weird name or a weird description or anything like that, there's so many different types of leagues, right? So we know we did not cover them all, but many of those are the majority of what you will see.
Right. And so kind of the next topic we'll talk about, I'll just kind of hit up and yeah, if you guys have some other things to add in there, let's do it. But as far as, positional kind of definitions out there, right? Like you'll hear a lot of people that are either well-versed fantasy players or have, seasoned fantasy players, or you'll hear, guys that are fantasy experts and doing podcasts and giving advice and all of those types of things refer to, positional, value type of things, or positional definitions, right? And so if somebody's talking about, I see them as a QB1 this week. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they see them as QB number 1 overall that week. What they really mean is that they're going to see the weekly points scored for that week anywhere between QB1 on the week and QB12 on the week. QB2 would be QB13 and QB24. And that's kind of how that's rolled out there. Same thing applies to running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. And it's always kind of in that same grouping where it's, based on groups of 12. And the reason for the 12 is because you typically see 12 teams in a league. That's kind of a standardized format out there with 12 players in a league. And thus you want to have, at least one running back and as a running back 1, you want to have at least one running back, right? Like you want to be able to mix and maneuver those things out there. If somebody says, you'll see that come up in a lot of like trade type of talks, things like that as well, that they're looking for a running back 1 for this guy, right? Not necessarily the running back first on the position of the depth chart for a team, but a running back 1 in the fantasy football aspect, which would be, a guy consistently ranking between 1 and 12 on the week or on the season. Any additional thoughts as far as kind of positional definitions when it comes to QB1, running back 1, etc.?
No, I think it is just being mindful of how it's being used, right? Because sometimes, especially when you're getting deep into analysis, like you start, especially the difference between 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, right? Is understanding the difference in those breaks, right? And that comes with some experience. There's no simple way to break that down, without having its own separate show. But it is understanding that they're talking, breaks, tier breaks, if you will, right? We talk about that during draft season a lot, right? The different tiers of how we kind of see players ranked and everything else. This is a more broad base tier style of ranking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I would say for anybody that, when you're listening to it, and it's not standardized, obviously, but when you say running back number 1, and then we're referring to that position, right? That number 1 running back that week. When you're talking about a running back 1 or an RB1, that's, your top 12. that way. So the word number is important in those discussions. Again, it's not standardized, but that's how I always kind of differentiated it when I was first learning about all of it, was that if I heard the word number, that meant a specific player. If I just heard RB1 or running back one, that meant the generalization of the top 12 or 14 or whatever league size you have.
Absolutely. That's a great call out there. Let's go ahead and head on into, positional values. As far as right there are some different values out there for different players and how that kind of comes to be. And Kevin, you've given a very good point of view on some positional values in the past. If you want to rock and roll us through some of those.
Yeah. So positional values, right, is think of it as volume, right? Value equals volume. So with those values, players like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, right? Those are in their own. CD Lamb this past year, right, are in their own kind of value because they get so much volume and I guess receiving work, right? Whether you look at target share percentage or snap percentage or routes run percentage. I mean, there's all these different analytic metrics that feed into this, right? So we can break it down all night and make everyone's ears bleed a little bit, but that's kind of the broad line to it, right? It is, yes, it's positional value, but it's also volume, right? So where you get some crossover is on your draft board, right? Like at what point do the running backs have equal, lesser, or greater value than this group of receivers, right? Christian McCaffrey, for all intents and purposes, is a positional value all to himself because of how he is used and the volume he receives in the San Francisco 49er offense. After Christian McCaffrey, the positional value of running back drops substantially, right? We've seen it more and more over these last few years. Wide receiver, kind of to flip that script, their positional value has gone up in that same amount of time, especially wide receivers who are on the field a lot, right? Your top end, your top end 1 and 2 receivers, right? Your X and your Y. So those receivers are on the field more than many running backs who are now splitting carries and passing in general, right? This is a pass happy league these days where the average team will throw the ball about 65% of the time. So receivers hold more value. So this is where you get into some of the crossover with positions, right? And then teams like the Kansas City Chiefs who focus around Travis Kelce a bit more, right? So the tight end positional value for said team. That's why coming into this season, we were all proponents of it. It was Travis Kelce or bust at tight end, right? So if you got Kelce, I'm sorry, it was kind of a bummer year. But if you listen to that and you didn't get Travis Kelce and you waited, you did okay because you ended up with Sam Laporta. You ended up with David Njoku. You ended up with Dalton Schultz. Like you ended up with these guys who had very good tight end scoring seasons, and you got them at a value because you did not spend a middle to back end of the first round pick on a tight end. So, like I said, there's a whole lot of analytics that can go into this, and you can make it as simple or as complicated as you so choose based off the time and effort and just dedication you have to understanding that. But the general idea of is volume, right? Value equals volume. Quarterbacks are kind of their own statistical category with that, but specifically with the positional groups, meaning running back, wide receiver, and tight end. It's about the volume they receive and how often they see the ball in their hands and are able to score points.
I like it. And then, Alex, any thoughts on that?
No, Kevin, the reason why he's won this league, won our home league as many times as he has, is because he has a great understanding of positional values. He does not make irresponsible draft choices because he gets pressured into them. He goes in with his plan, and he quickly adapts to what the draft is doing. I mean, realistically, I like to say that when we've said it, that 1 week does not a fantasy football season make, but one draft sure as hell can. So you gotta be paying attention. And Kevin has a great understanding of positional values, and it helps him build a really good roster, a frustratingly good roster year in and year out. As somebody who has been playing against him for the better part of the last decade and a half. Actually, shoot, more than that now. This will be year 16, I think, for us in this, for me at least, in the league, which means that the league itself is coming up on 20 years. Not to make you guys feel old or anything.
Yeah, pretty close. We started it in
05, 06.
I think it was 06.
I think it was 06.
Yeah. I think I joined.
We started it the year I was in Georgia.
Yeah. So I joined in either 07 or 08. And here we are. I'll segue, if I can, Derek, about positional values, because that positional value is only based on what your league rules dictate is valuable. And that's the next thing that we're going to talk about is understanding the league rules. And I kind of touched on it earlier, is at that perfect example. I did not understand the league rules of a league that I was in. I got really upset about that and quit the season halfway through, which isn't fun to anybody. I admit that I was wrong when I did that, but I was frustrated and I said, screw you guys, I'm going home. And I did. But that's because I didn't understand the rules. So honestly, like, you can do yourself so many favors and draft the best possible roster if you just go ahead and give the rules a look over before you start drafting. And don't stand for anybody who starts changing rules halfway through a draft. That ain't cool. Don't let that happen. But understand your league rules. Understand if it is a PPR, if it's a half point PPR, if it's a standard scoring, if it is a super flex, right? Because that's going to determine, how you run your draft, how you, what positions are more valuable than other positions. If it's a 2 tight end league, like Kevin was talking about, then those tight ends all of a sudden become a little bit more valuable than the running backs, the typical running backs do, or that 3rd or 4th string running back. You're not going to try to build out and draft 3 or 4 running backs and then draft 2 tight ends. Probably going to mix some tight ends in there before you draft 3 or 4 running backs. So understanding the league rules is super important. And it also helps, clear up any confusion that you may have, or just makes life on the commissioner easier. It makes life on all your league mates easier. If everybody just understands the rules, of the league that you're in. And I highly suggest that if you don't understand the rules of whatever league you're in, ask your commissioner, because I tell you what, it is so annoying to try and find somebody 3 days before draft, or hell, after a draft happens, to take over a team. So a commissioner, any good commissioner, will try to make sure that you are good to go for that season, at least for that season. And they'll work through any questions that you may have. So that's a big thing. If you know the rules that you're playing up against, it just makes your life and everybody else's life so much easier.
Absolutely. Well, and you'll find too, by reading through the rules, because I'm willing to bet you that in a 12-person league, there's probably only 7, maybe 8 of those folks that fully read the rules and went through those things and fully understand them. And there's actually less than that probably actually fully understand and comprehend every rule that's there. And you can certainly create advantages for your roster by just understanding the rules at a very in-depth level.
So think of it this way. This is going to be a crude example, but it's a good one, and it's one that I understand. So hopefully other people will understand it too. And I'm not saying this is everybody, but why do rich people? Why are they rich? Because they understand tax law, right? They understand how those laws apply to them, and they're able to maintain their money because they understand how the system works. Likewise, in fantasy football, if you understand the rules, odds are you're going to be able to understand the system in place and make it to your advantage, so that you will eventually end up as a rich person and then have to avoid paying taxes.
And
very correct, but that is not the analogy.
It's a terrible analogy, right?
With.
Right.
But I'm not wrong.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But totally not where I would have gone.
So while you were going,
it's also apropos for the season because I've been thinking I've got to do my taxes here soon.
There you go. Do you guys remember the South Park episode where Cartman is referencing Bill Belichick? As you were going through that, Alex, I kept constantly having that image play in my head going, I misinterpreted the rules. And so anyway, that's
oh man,
that's where that took me down, that little rabbit hole there. So when we were looking through this, we were originally going to look through the like the top 10 QB miss. I think we'll go ahead and move that to next week and rock and roll that when we've got a little more time to really flush that out and go all the way through it. But before we kind of wrap up tonight, any other thoughts on any of the topics that we've covered over? Anything else that beginners to fantasy football should really kind of take notice of and take heed of?
I'll tell you before Kevin gets in and drops some actual wisdom here. I will tell you that this is a game, right? It's designed to be fun, whether you do it for money. I know of a guy who does fantasy sports professionally and has made a handsome living off of it because he's incredibly smart. But it's meant to be fun, right? It's meant to be a good time. And if it's not that, maybe don't. Just don't. Remove yourself from that situation. There's a lot of negativity out there. Anyways, just remove yourself from it. You don't need to add more to it. So have fun. Damn it. That's what fantasy football is supposed to be about, is having fun. Now, Kevin, your real knowledge that you can drop on people.
I would say when first starting out, yes, here we've kind of spent the better part of the last 45 minutes, right, laying out a generalized blueprint of what to expect, some terminologies, what they mean, and really, I probably, when we were talking about it pre-show, we probably should have put the understanding the league rules at the top because it is that important, right? It really needs to be one of those things that is highlighted, italicized, underscored, and bolded, right? Like it is that important. I would say, with that being one, these concepts are solid number 2, but then before you go into the draft and you start understanding rankings, right? And this is, I could take us down an unintended rabbit hole here because I do think that this is an important piece, right? Is the rankings. I will tell you that if you are picking up a magazine at your local grocery store or Walmart or whatever, 2 weeks before the draft and reading that magazine and then walking into the draft thinking you have a good beat on everything, you are playing the fool. And that is because those articles are written in May and June and published in July, so that way they can sell in July and August before the draft happens, right? So it's outdated by the time it even hits the shelves. So those rankings while there's some good content within them, and you have the season and stat kind of breakdown, and they have some decent strategies in there as to why they're doing what they're doing. So it's not all bogus, right? Some of the content is actually very applicable. It's just dated content. So make sure that you are doing more research than just picking up a magazine at the store, right? And if we really want to get into it, I would tell you that the ESPN top 300 is trash as well, because those guys aren't in-depth analysis people, right? They are taking compiled data. Yes, they have these writers, and yes, they have these insiders who do some different things. But I'm telling you, the real insiders will be people who have the daily, weekly shows, who actually talk to some of these writers, who can understand where game film is coming in, who update their draft boards, daily, if not weekly, right? Or weekly, if not daily, I guess is the right phrase, because of all the things that are happening. It is an area that is absolutely important, right? And this is, again, it's getting a little bit more in depth than what I think in general what we're intending for this to be. So I'm not trying to make it daunting. I'm just saying, as you continue to learn and get comfortable with the fantasy football concepts, and if you find that this is something that you truly enjoy to do, where you get your knowledge and where you do your research matters, right? Please check out multiple sites. Please, right? We will be the first ones to raise our hand. We do not get everything right. We have had our fair share of misses, but we've had a fair share of hits too, right? And that's across the board. Everybody has a similar track record. Some are a little better than others, but look at multiple places for said rankings and then write your own down. Don't go off of a cheat sheet. Write your own down. It's okay to bring a spiral notebook into a draft, right? Or type up some notes and kind of have your rankings and your Xing players off or crossing through them as they get drafted, right? That's okay. Because to go along with this, as we get towards the end of summer, we will have our kind of draft guideline show, right? And we'll be breaking down drafts, and I'll be talking entirely too much about my tier-based rankings and why they're so stinking important, but I'm telling you, they work. Like
Right.
that format does work, and you might have different players in your tiers, and that is okay, because we are allowed to interpret the information differently and decipher it how we think it's going to be best applied. But it's so much better than just a top 300 cheat sheet that was done, in May or June, that you're trying to apply at the end of August after roster cuts, after you've seen them on the field and you have game tape on them and you've seen what the new offensive coordinators are going to do and how the offensive line injuries are going to change the dynamic of the running game. Like all these things, it is a lot. But there are people who do all this stuff for a living that help sift through that information and help make our lives easier as fantasy football players.
Right. And I really like what you said there as well, is kind of doing your own rankings and don't necessarily take somebody else's there. And so one of the things that I always tell folks if they're asking for hey, how should I start doing rankings? It's okay to take an expert consensus rankings type of sheet out there, right? You have all of these different places that have different rankings based on different things. It's okay to start with a consensus out there, and then look at that and adjust how you see fit. That would be probably the easiest way, and probably the easiest way for somebody just kind of getting started into that is if you're really liking a guy over another guy, you don't have to go off of what some expert said somewhere, right? Like, move them ahead of that, adjust your rankings as you see fit. And it's okay to start with a with consensus rankings, with ADP rankings, with those types of things, and adjust them to your preferences there as well. So you don't necessarily have to start from scratch, but do your own do your own type of ranking in there, because that will certainly help you out, and it allows you to move through the draft more seamlessly without going on tilt. And tilt's something we'll talk a whole lot more when we get into the draft strategy and as we start nearing August there as well. So awesome. Any final thoughts out there?
Enjoy, right? Enjoy the off season. Enjoy, getting into fantasy football, right? If this is your intro, thank you for joining us for kind of a basic intro to it. May your journey and endeavors be lucrative and positive and a hell of a lot of good time, like Alex said. So as always, hit us up at Good Old Boys FF. We are here. We will answer any questions you guys have in terms of league questions, draft questions, dynasty questions, keeper questions. What's the difference? Why is it D/ST? Like why do they combine both? Right? Like, we are happy to help and happy to answer any types of questions that you guys have. So reach out to us and we will get back to you.
Right. And no question, even ones that are, beginning type of deals, we enjoy being able to walk with somebody on that journey and being able to kind of help them get started on that. So absolutely, do not shy away from sending the questions over. As Kevin said, it's at Good Old Boys FF, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the social places. You can find us at Good Old Boys FF. And again, the best place to support this independent podcast, head over to YouTube, youtube.com/at Good Old Boys FF. Alex, any final thoughts?
Nah. I'm excited for the off season. Underwear Olympics, I think, start next week, right? Somewhere around there.
It's coming up for sure.
Then the Spring Football League.
Yeah,
exactly.
The USL. That'll be fun.
Yeah, it'll be a good time. That's going to do it for us tonight. Y'all have a good one. Be safe. He's Kevin. He's Alex. I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe. Toodaloos.